My name is Elias, and I never saw it coming. I still feel it, this hollow ache under my breastbone, like a dull, constant drumbeat that echoes every time I breathe. Back then, everything seemed so right. We'd chosen a little chapel by the cliffs, walls of polished stone opening onto wild, bruised skies. I remember the day felt endless, like our love could stretch across oceans. You know that feeling when your chest feels too full, like your heart is going to burst through your ribs? Yeah, that. We danced under string lights tangled in the rafters, her laughter floating up and looping around my senses until the world was just the two of us. I remember her dress, soft lace, a color so pure it seemed to glow in that dim light. I gripped her hand so tight my knuckles turned white, convinced I'd never let go. A few nights later, I started noticing the silence between us. She'd come home and drop her keys with this heavy thud, her shoulders slumped as if carrying secrets I couldn't touch. I asked her about work, about her day, but her eyes flicked away too quick, and there was this tremor in her voice, like she was afraid I'd piece together what she was trying to hide. My hands shook when I reached for her, like I was expecting her to burn me. I caught glimpses, her phone lighting up on the bedside table, messages I wasn't meant to see. But I didn't look. I was so desperate to believe it was just stress, you know? That weird knot in my gut felt like denial. I told myself she loved me, that all this distance was normal, that every relationship had its ups and downs. But denial has a weight. It presses down on your lungs until you're suffocating on hope. Then, one evening, I came home early. The hallway smelled like perfume, too sweet, cloying, and definitely not hers. My jaw locked, and my throat went dry. I heard laughter from the bedroom, her laughter, and another laugh that wasn't mine. I froze in the doorway, body tense, breath catching in my throat like I'd run a marathon. My hands curled into fists, fingernails digging into my palms. I remember the buzz of the neon sign outside our window bleeding through the curtains, painting stripes on the floor, red and humiliating. She turned, and I saw her eyes go wide, like she'd been caught in some messy lie. The other guy froze, too, like a bad dream you can't look away from. I felt rage and shame collide, my knees felt rubbery, like I wanted to fall to them and beg her to say it wasn't real. But I couldn't speak. My voice was stuck under that knot in my chest, tangled in dread. I left that night without a word. My car engine hummed louder than my thoughts, and every red light felt like permission to lose control. I drove until the fuel gauge hovered near empty, like I was chasing an end to this chaos. My hands were slick with sweat, knuckles white as I gripped the wheel. I remember my heart feeling like a fist pounding against my ribs, rage mingled with grief so sharp it cut right through me. Now, whenever I look at that chapel photo, her smiling beside me, oblivious to what she'd soon shatter, I feel my insides twist. I tell myself I deserve revenge, that I deserve to turn her world upside down, because how could someone who said, always, throw it away so easily? And that thought scorches me. I don't know where this path will lead, but I know I can't stay numb. She broke our vows, shattered our promises, and now I'm learning what it means to fight back. My hands still shake, but they're steady enough to plan. And believe me, there's nothing purer than that. I remember waking up that morning with my pillow damp and my mind buzzing in a way I never knew possible. My body felt heavy, like gravity kept the mattress from letting me rise. I pressed my hand against my chest, expecting to feel my heart's usual steady drumming, but it was erratic, stumbling over itself. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the heater, and I stared at the ceiling, trying to ignore the knot twisting in my gut. It felt like a weight settling in my lungs, and I wondered if I should just let it crush me, but I couldn't. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and felt the chill of the floor under my feet, like a reminder that the world was waiting, even if I wasn't ready. My phone buzzed in the other room, and I hesitated, hand hovering above the nightstand. Each vibration felt like a countdown to something I didn't want to face. When I finally reached for it, my thumb slid across a message from her, just one line that made my chest convulse. It said, "Can't wait to see you again." That's all. No name, no hint, just words that felt like betrayal carved into my skin. My hands shook so badly I dropped the phone, and it skidded across the floor. I swallowed, taste gone dry, and crawled after it, heart pounding so loud it felt like the whole house knew. I flipped it over and stared at the screen until my vision blurred. A part of me wanted to call her, to demand she explain this, but another part, this cold, calculating edge, started ticking in my mind. It whispered that I couldn't just stand there and take it. My jaw was clenched so tight I could taste metal in my mouth, and my breath came in shallow gasps. I felt torn between begging for answers and tearing her apart for the lies. I paced in circles in the living room, each step hard enough to echo against the hardwood floors. The silence between my footfalls felt like a taunt, each thud a reminder of what I'd trusted and what was slipping away. I ran my fingers through my hair until it stood up at odd angles, and I felt sweat bead along my hairline. The sweater I'd worn that day felt like armor, but it did nothing to block the ache widening in my chest. Then there was her message again, another text, same scent of betrayal. "Remember that night?" it read, and my stomach plummeted, stomach rolling like waves in a storm. My hands trembled as I held the phone away from my face, as if the words were poison and I needed distance. I realized my heart had gone numb, like it didn't know how to feel anything but dread. I pressed the button to call her, but the line went straight to voicemail. I dropped onto the couch, hugging a cushion to my chest like it was the only thing left that belonged to me. My vision blurred again, tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. I tasted salt, remembered the way her lips felt on mine, not this hollow lie. Panic and fury tangled in my veins and I could feel my throat tighten, like I wanted to scream until my voice broke. But everything felt muted, as if I was watching someone else's life play out. It was then I realized I couldn't stay trapped in that fog of disbelief. Something snapped, and a new determination rose, cold and clear. I sat up, the cushion falling to the floor with a soft thud, and I made a choice. I would find out what she was hiding, who she was meeting in those late hours, and why she'd shattered everything we built. My hands steadied, jaw unclenched, and I felt the first spark of resolve. This wasn't over, not even close. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me the next evening. My heart felt like it was beating through my throat, each pump a reminder that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I paced near the window, watching headlights pass on the street below, thinking about her smile and how it hid everything. My jaw was locked, teeth grinding, and I felt sweat bead at my temples. I lit a cigarette even though I quit years ago. The smoke curled around me, and I sucked it in, trying to burn away the knot in my chest. My hands trembled so badly that ash fell on the floorboards. I glared at the ring on my dresser, the one I bought with sweat and hope, and something inside me snapped. I realized I needed proof, something undeniable, something I could hold when my mind whispered doubts. That's when I found the envelope hidden in her nightstand drawer. My skin crawled as I unsealed it, fingers slick with sweat. Inside were two things. First, a photograph, her and him, arm in arm, laughing like they didn't know I existed. Proof 1, photo a crumpled, glossy snapshot of her in that soft lace dress, but this time tangled in his arms, cheeks flush with delight. I stared at it until my vision shook, saw the way her eyes sparkled at him, and felt bile rise in my throat. My nails dug into my palms so hard I saw stars dancing behind my eyelids. The second proof was a folded note, creased from being shoved and shoved again. Proof 2, message. I shouldn't feel this, but you make me feel alive again. Tonight at the pier. Don't let him know. I traced the handwriting with shaking fingers, tongue burning the inside of my lip. My pulse drummed so loud I thought the walls would vibrate. I pressed my palm over my heart, trying to steady the storm inside. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts, and I felt dizzy, like the air itself was conspiring to knock me over. She walked in as I held those proofs, pale light from the hallway painting her face in harsh strokes. She froze, eyes widening when she saw the photo and the note in my hand. I watched her chest rise and fall, saw her throat bob as she swallowed. My hands shook so violently I clutched the dresser for support. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then her shoulders slumped, and she wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold, cold from guilt, or perhaps regret. I could see her jaw trembling as she searched my face, maybe looking for mercy. But my heart was an icicle of rage. I felt heat rush behind my eyes, so fierce it tasted like fire. She whispered my name, just my name, and it sounded like a curse. My hands tightened around the photograph until it bent and creased under my grip. I felt tears sting my eyes, hot and salty, but I didn't let them fall. I wouldn't give her that sight. I felt my throat burn as I swallowed down every plea that tried to slip out. I trusted you, I said, voice rough, like gravel dragged across concrete. My lips trembled even as I tried to infuse them with control. She took a step forward, eyes watering, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I held up the note, the photograph, and suddenly everything quieted except the frantic beat of my own blood in my ears. She tried to explain, something about loneliness, something about feeling unheard, but the words floated away. I could only feel the ache of her betrayal, the hollow crush in my chest where our future used to live. My fists unclenched, trembling, and I dropped the photo onto the dresser, where it slid and landed face up, a silent accusation. My vision blurred, chest tightening, but I felt a clarity cut through the fog. I couldn't stay in this apartment anymore. I grabbed my coat, pushed past her, and felt the door click shut behind me. Outside, the night air hit me like an oppressor, but it was cleaner than staying inside with her lies. As I started down the hallway, I realized this wasn't just about her. It was about every promise she broke, every lie she told, and every ounce of love I poured into someone who threw it away. I didn't know the shape my revenge would take, but I knew it would be precise, cold, and inevitable. And that thought gave me a sharp, dangerous comfort, like coming home. I found myself drifting through my days like a ghost trapped in someone else's life. Every step felt rehearsed, like I was walking through a play I'd outgrown. I'd dress in the clothes she once said suited me best, her favorite blue button-up, and stare in the mirror, tracing the line of my jaw with shaky fingers. My reflection felt foreign, eyes dull with exhaustion and rage. I'd thought revenge would burn away this haze, but so far it had only made it sharper. That afternoon, I tailed him. His routine was so ordinary it hurt: coffee at the corner shop, a quick nod to the barista, then off down the street as if he were heading to some innocent appointment. I kept my distance, headlights glinting in his rearview mirror like cold eyes. When he paused at the park bench by the river, I watched him light a cigarette and exhale a plume of smoke that floated upward, ghost white against the dark water. Each curl of smoke felt like a mocking whisper, reminding me how small I'd become in this story. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, no proofs this time, but I needed to anchor the moment in my mind, to remember how he looked when he didn't know he was being watched. The camera click felt too loud, like a gunshot in a cathedral. My breath came in shallow bursts, and I pressed my free hand against my mouth as if I could muffle the noise inside me. When the smoke drifted away, I realized how every small ritual of his now tasted like poison. That night, I paced through the empty rooms of our old apartment, the moonlight slanting through the blinds and carving stripes across the floor. My heart pounded so loud I thought the neighbors might hear it. I pulled open my laptop and logged into the anonymous forum where strangers bared their scars. My fingers hovered above the keys as I typed, "I'm planning something. I need advice." The words felt heavy, like stones I was dropping into a well. I hit send and flinched. Replies came fast, strangers offering everything from public shaming to financial ruin. Some ideas made my stomach twist, others made my pulse spike with dangerous excitement. I read them, one after another, and each suggestion was like a key turning in a lock behind my eyes. I closed the laptop and sank onto the couch, the springs groaning beneath me. My chest felt tight, as if my ribs were compressing in on my heart. I rubbed my fingers over my sternum, trying to soothe the ache. One comment stood out: lure him somewhere meaningful. Give him something that belongs to her. Watch him realize the cost. The idea settled in my mind like a seed sprouting thorns. I stood up, hands brushing over the dresser where her engagement ring lay, silent, mocking. I slipped it onto a chain and closed my fist around it until I could feel the metal bite into my palm. Then I slid the chain into my pocket, its weight a pulse at my hip. My phone buzzed, her name again. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, and then I swiped it away. She'd left a voicemail, voice trembling with regret. But each apology felt thinner than air. I tilted my head back, jaw clenched, and let the silence fill the room. Nothing she could say would reshape what I knew now. So I made a plan. I'd invite him to meet at the pier, that same place from her note, under a fake pretense I'd cook up on the forum. I'd watch him arrive, see his chest tighten when I handed him the chain, see the color drain from his face as he realized whose betrayal he was carrying. Then I'd slip away, leaving him alone under the street lamp's sickly glow, with the weight of her lies hanging heavy on his chest. As I laid out the details, time, wording, backstory, I felt the fog inside me crumble. My palms steadied, my breathing evened. For the first time since I found that photo, I felt something clear: purpose. The path ahead was dark and stark, but it was mine to walk. And that, I knew, was only the beginning. My boots clicked against the wooden planks of the pier, and each tap sounded like a countdown in my ears. I kept my gaze low, shoulders rounded, like any other stranger who might wander down here. The air smelled of salt and rust, and I pulled my coat tighter, even though it wasn't cold. My jaw was stiff, muscles locked from tension, and I found myself tracing the chain in my pocket, her ring hanging from it, heavy like regret. I settled onto one of the weathered benches, legs splayed, elbows on my knees, staring out at the dark water. My breath came in measured bursts, but inside, my heart was racing like a runaway train. I tried to steady it by counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, like I used to calm myself before a big presentation. But tonight wasn't about presentations. It was about betrayal and setting things right, however crooked that path felt. I glanced at my phone. No message yet. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, and I wiped my palms on my jeans, leaving faint gray smudges. The wooden slats under my fingertips were rough, splintered, and I pressed harder, as if I could anchor myself against the thoughts swirling in my mind. Part of me wanted to flee, to toss the chain into the water and pretend none of this ever happened. But that thought was drowned out by every lie she told, every promise she broke. Then I saw him, his silhouette stepping onto the pier, shoulders hunched, like he didn't know what awaited him. My pulse spiked, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I stood, hands shaking, wanting to shove the ring chain into his hands and watch him choke on the truth. My mouth went dry like I'd been running through a desert with no water. I took a breath, trying to summon calm, but only got a crackle, like a shaky whisper, "This is it." He walked toward me, and I noticed the way his steps faltered when he got close, like he recognized something was off. I kept my face neutral, eyes steady, chest lifting and falling at a steady pace. When he was only a few feet away, I reached into my pocket and let the chain slide through my fingers. He froze, gaze dropping to the pendant, eyebrows knitting together. My hands trembled, but I held onto his wrist and dropped the chain into his open palm. He looked up at me, shock and confusion in his eyes, and for a moment, the world stilled. I could see his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed, and I swear I saw his skin go pale under the dim light strung along the pier. The ring caught the light, flickering like a small star fallen into the sea. His lips parted, and he blinked, like he was trying to make sense of something he refused to believe. I took a step back, heart hammering in my ears, and let him stare. The waves slapped against the supports below, a low drumbeat to match mine. My breathing stuttered, and I felt tears prickle at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't look away. I wanted him to feel every ounce of what this meant, that he wasn't just part of her lie, he was carrying the weight of her betrayal. He clutched the chain like it might vanish, fingers digging into his palm until I saw the skin blanch. His lips trembled, and he whispered my name, then hers, like he couldn't decide which was more real. I held on to that moment, that sharp crack of realization, savoring it like justice cold and clear. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the heavy ring and his own guilt pressing against his ribs. With each step back down the pier, I felt the knot in my chest loosen just a fraction, replaced by something darker, resolve. I didn't know what came next, and maybe I'd gone too far. But I'd given him the weight of her lies, and in doing so, I reclaimed a piece of myself. And that, I realized, was the true beginning of my revenge. I stood at the edge of the courtyard outside our old apartment building, cold air brushing over my skin like a warning. My breath fogged in front of me, little clouds that vanished as soon as they formed, like hope in his chest when I stepped away. I pressed my fingers against the pendant tucked beneath my shirt, letting the weight of her ring remind me why I was here. The pull in my gut was fierce, equal parts dread and anticipation, and my heart hammered so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear it. The lobby lights flickered as I slipped inside. The elevator smelled of dust and machinery, and its walls echoed with every nervous footstep. My hands were slick with sweat, even though the air in here was frigid. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a tiny USB drive, one of the forum's suggestions: dig in, find every trace of his lies. My fingers trembled as I rolled it between my thumb and forefinger. The thought of unlocking his secrets twisted my stomach into knots, but that knot was driving me forward. I followed the corridor to the maintenance room, where, years ago, I'd hidden our boxes of keepsakes without thinking I'd ever return. My pulse quickened with each creak of the door, jaw clenched so tight it ached. The fluorescent bulb overhead hummed like a beast ready to pounce. I crouched beside the shelf, pulling out a dusty box labeled E+A, the letters nearly rubbed away by time. My fingers brushed over our initials, and I swallowed hard, feeling both guilt and righteous purpose tangle in my throat. Inside the box were letters she'd written to me in the early days, messy cursive, declarations of love, but I shoved them aside, heart pounding painfully. Beneath them was a thin envelope marked with his name. I eased it out, hands shaking enough to almost tear it open. When I finally broke the seal, my blood ran cold. It held printed statements of payments, amounts wired, invoices for reservations at a riverside cabin, hush fees for a celebration that never involved me. My vision blurred as I scanned each line, the numbers burning like acid on my skin. My lungs constricted and I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady the pounding. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. I refused to let her see me broken. My breath rattled in my ribs, and I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the filing cabinet for support. The note from the forum echoed in my mind: reveal the money. Expose the hidden cost. And now I had it, proof that he was more than a fleeting lie. He was part of her betrayal in cold, calculated sums. I tucked the envelope into my coat, buttoning each fastener with deliberate care. The act felt ritualistic, like donning armor before battle. My palms went damp again, and I wiped them on my jeans, tracing the outline of the contents in my pocket. I felt the sharp spike of satisfaction that came with knowing she hadn't anticipated this twist. My resolve hardened like steel in my chest. No more half steps, no more wavering. On the ride down, the elevator transformed from an enclosed box to a crucible. I leaned against the wall, eyes closed, listening to the hum of the machinery. I felt my muscles relax and then tense, like coiling springs. I pictured his face when he opened the envelope, how his skin would drain of color and his words would catch in his throat. The image burned straight to my core, igniting a hunger I hadn't felt since I first found that photo. Back on the sidewalk, I paused beneath the dim glow of the street lamp and took a steadying breath. My boots crunched over gravel, each step carrying me away from what was left of us and toward the plan I'd set into motion. I ran a hand over my neck, skin prickling, pulse echoing in my ears. I didn't know how she'd respond when I revealed this next piece, but I did know one thing: she'd never see me coming. And perhaps that, more than anything, would be the sweetest revenge. I woke up feeling a trembling hush in my bones, like the world had pressed pause just to watch me move. My chest felt hollow, empty of the usual thundering rhythm, as if it was waiting for the next piece to fall. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers brushing the cord where I hid the USB drive and the envelope full of invoices. My skin was cold, goosebumps rising along my forearms, and I realized I could taste fear, sharp, metallic, right at the back of my throat. I took a breath that felt too loud, and I let it out slowly, reminding myself why I could never turn back now. I tossed on my coat, its fabric rough against my skin, like a constant reminder of what I carried inside, and stepped out into the morning haze. The street was quiet, broken only by distant footsteps and the hum of a lone car slipping down the road. I kept my head down, shoulders stooped, pretending I was just another stranger passing through. My heart fluttered whenever a passerby gave me a second look, but I forced myself to keep moving forward. Each step felt like a promise to myself. I would finish this, no matter how tangled the mess became. When I reached the cafe where I told him to meet, my hands were slick with sweat, and I pressed the envelope in my pocket as if it might scald me through the fabric. I told the barista I'd wait inside. My voice came out cracked, unfamiliar. I perched on a stool by the window, back straight, eyes scanning the door every few seconds. The wooden counter was smooth under my fingertips, and I drummed my fingers against it to quell the storm in my veins. With every passing minute, the knot in my gut tightened, and I felt dizzy, as if the air around me was draining away. Then he walked in, shoulders hunched, eyes darting around until they found me. He froze at the threshold, confusion and guilt warring in his expression. My chest pounded like a warning bell, and I realized I hadn't blinked in what felt like an eternity. He took a tentative step forward, and I motioned to the empty seat across from me. The chair creaked under him when he sat, and I watched him swallow, throat bobbing with every breath. He looked like a man realizing his world was shifting beneath him. I slid the USB drive and the envelope across the table, watching his fingers hesitate at the edge. The cafe's warmth felt like a lie, a stark contrast to the storm I carried inside. I kept my voice low, almost a whisper, but each word struck the table like a hammer. Open them. His hand shook as he picked up the drive, palms slick against the metal casing. He glanced at me, eyes wide and pleading. My jaw clenched, and I could taste my own determination on my tongue. He plugged the drive into his laptop and unfolded the envelope. His face went pale as the screen lit up with lines of numbers, payments for bookings, hush fees, transfers to accounts she shared with him. His Adam's apple jerked, and he ran a finger along one entry as if seeking a mistake. I leaned forward, voice catching, but controlled. These are the costs of her betrayal. And you helped hide them. He closed his eyes, jaw slack, like I'd taken the air right out of him. I watched his chest rise and fall, chest heaving with shame. He looked up at me, eyes glistening with something like remorse. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but no sound came out. I stood then, heart still raging, and I let the moment stretch. When I finally walked away, I felt a release so fierce it left my limbs trembling. The weight I'd carried for weeks had shifted from my bones to his. As I pushed open the cafe door, sunlight hit me like redemption. My steps felt lighter, echoing off the pavement, and I realized this was only the middle of my story. But for the first time, I felt like I was writing it, and that, I knew, was power. I spent the next stretch in a fog of plans and what-ifs, unable to shake the echo of that cafe's hush. My pulse felt like an engine revving without release, muscles coiled under my skin. I kept replaying his face, pale, haunted, like a looping nightmare that wouldn't end. My hands trembled as I sipped black coffee at my kitchen table, the mug burning my fingers, and I realized I was holding on to that heat like a lifeline. She'd sent one last text, something about meeting to make amends, but I didn't reply. My chest tightened just thinking of hearing her voice again. Instead, I tore a page from my notebook and scrawled out names and places: her bridal boutique, the restaurant where she'd meet friends, the path she took to the chapel. I felt sweat slick on my upper lip as I traced each line, remembering how we'd once mapped dreams onto blank pages. Now those same blank pages felt like the blueprint for her undoing. I packed a small bag with essentials: coat, gloves, my phone, and the engagement ring on its chain. Every time my fingers brushed the cool metal, I felt a jolt of furious satisfaction. I kept telling myself this wasn't petty, it was justice. But a whisper in my skull asked whether I was becoming the thing I despised. I shoved the doubt aside, breathing shallow, locking the bag's zipper with deliberate clicks, like each one sealed my resolve. Under cover of twilight, I slipped out onto the street. The sky was bruised purple, and the air smelled like rain. My boots crunched on wet pavement, heart thrumming so loud I thought passers-by might hear it. I tucked the ring into my coat pocket, its weight a reminder. this wasn't about her lover anymore, it was about her. I needed to make her feel what I felt when she gasped and recoiled at the proofs. First, I headed to her bridal boutique. The window glowed soft white, mannequins in lace gowns posed like silent witnesses. I leaned close, pressing my forehead against the cool glass until I saw my breath mist. Inside, I could hear quiet laughter and the soft hum of sewing machines. My stomach churned, envy and rage tangled like snakes. I left a single rose on the doorstep, white petals stained with a smear of red ink. A note tucked beneath read, "Your purity is stained." My hand shook so badly I thought the petals would slip away. Next, I followed her to the restaurant where she'd made reservations with her friends. I sat at a nearby table, hands wrapped around a wine glass until it bit into my palm. I watched her laugh over a menu, shoulders loose, eyes bright, eyes that once lit up for me. My mouth went dry as I remembered every inside joke we'd shared, every plan we'd made beneath these very stars. I sent a waiter over with a plate of red velvet cake, topped with a single black candle. When she blew it out, the flame left a thin trail of smoke, like a signal only I could see. Her laughter faltered, and I saw her friend's curious glance. I wanted to shout, "Remember me," but instead I stood and slipped away into the night. My legs felt rubbery, but I forced them on, each step pounding my resolve deeper into my bones. I realized that every move I made was a line drawn in the sand, a promise that I wouldn't stop until she knew the cost of betrayal. Later, I parked myself in my car by the cliffside chapel. The wind whipped against the windows, and the chapel's shadows seemed to sway with it. I held the ring in my palm, heart a wild drumbeat, and I pictured her face when I left it at the altar this time, not as her groom, but as her reckoning. I hadn't decided exactly how I'd place it, on the steps, in the aisle, maybe on the pulpit itself. But I knew it would be there, an echo of the vow she broke. My hands curled into fists, knuckles whitening. I felt tears blister behind my eyelids, but I couldn't let them fall. Not yet. I exhaled through my teeth, hearing the crack of air like broken glass. The chapel doors stood silent, waiting. And so was I, ready to step out, to leave this mark, and to watch her world shatter a second time. My breath steadied, pulse slowing to a deliberate thump. The night was mine, and I was finally beginning to write the last chapter of her story. That night, I stood outside the chapel's heavy wooden doors, breathing in the damp air that smelled like moss and regret. My pulse ticked in my throat, each beat a reminder that I was here by choice, steel in my veins. I ran a hand over the ring's chain beneath my shirt, feeling its cold weight like a promise I couldn't back out of. The moonlight slipped through broken stained glass, painting the stone steps in bruised purples and silvers. I swallowed, jaw tight, and climbed the steps. Inside, the pews were empty and the silence felt alive, pressing in on me until I thought I'd suffocate. My boots echoed through the nave as I moved toward the altar, rings swinging from my pocket like a pendulum counting down to something I wasn't sure I could face. My hands trembled, and I caught myself gripping the chain so hard I left impressions on my palm. I closed my eyes and pictured her face, the way she'd smiled when we first toured this place, how she'd traced her fingers over the stone columns like they were part of our future. I knelt at the altar rail, shoulders shaking as I unclasped the chain. My breath caught in my chest, and tears stung my eyes, but I pressed them back. I couldn't give her that sight. I draped the chain over the rail so the ring lay nestled against the wood, its band catching stray moonlight and gleaming like a cold confession. My fingers lingered on the rail, and I felt the grain dig into my skin, grounding me in this act of finality. A soft creak made me freeze. I turned and saw her silhouette in the doorway, hesitation in her stance, like a ghost afraid to cross a threshold. Her voice trembled when she spoke, almost swallowed by the vast space. "Elias?" My heart lurched, and I clenched my jaw so tight I thought I'd crack a tooth. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears, drowning out the drip of distant water from a broken fountain somewhere behind me. She stepped forward, each footfall tentative. Her dress brushed the stone floor, and I noticed how the fabric shimmered in the pale light, just as it had on our wedding night, only now it looked tattered, as though it had absorbed every lie she'd told. She reached the rail, hesitated, and then sank to her knees opposite me, chest heaving, arms trembling. I watched the fine line of her jaw, how it quivered when she swallowed back a sob. "Why?" she whispered, voice cracking. I could see her eyes glisten, damp like if I reached out they might slip away entirely. My own throat felt raw, words lodged like splinters I couldn't dislodge. I stared at her, at the girl who promised always, and felt an ache ripple through my chest that was sharper than any rage I'd known. "I needed you to feel it," I said, voice low, each word deliberate. "To carry it as I did." The chapel swallowed our voices, leaving them echoing like distant thunder. She pressed her palms to the rail, knuckles white, and leaned forward. I saw her take in the ring, the chain, the way the metal gleamed against the wood, and I felt something shift, like I'd unlocked a door I couldn't close again. Her shoulders hunched, body folding in on itself, and tears spilled free, tracing wet trails down her cheeks. I watched the guilt and regret war in her eyes, so vivid it was like watching her soul unravel. My own vision blurred, but I refused to look away. I remembered the countless nights I'd lay awake, listening to her breathing, unaware she was sharing it with someone else. She reached out, fingers grazing the ring, and I felt a spark of something. Pity? Relief? I couldn't name it. It flickered, then died as I stepped back, chest tightening. The chain swung, a pendulum of fate, and she let go, hands dropping to her lap as if the weight of everything had finally crushed her. Without another word, I turned and walked away. Each step echoed off the stone until I reached the doors. Outside, the wind picked up, whipping at my coat, and I realized the knot in my chest had loosened just enough to let me breathe. I glanced back once, saw her silhouetted in the doorway, the ring at her knees like a confession she wasn't ready to answer. I climbed into my car, hands still tingling from adrenaline, and I closed the door. The engine's rumble was softer than the silence inside the chapel, but it was enough. I exhaled, letting the air shudder through me, and drove off into the night. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something clear. I had given her my truth, and now I was free to write my own. I found myself driving with no real destination, the engine's hum almost lulling me into a false calm. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles went white, but I couldn't stop. The streetlights blurred past, and I felt like I was caught between two worlds, the one I'd known and the one I was carving out with every choice. My chest felt full, almost swollen, and every breath came uneven, like I was relearning how to inhale. Eventually, I pulled into a quiet park lot, too restless to keep going. I shut off the engine and sat in silence, listening to the muffled chirp of crickets and the distant rumble of traffic. My heart hammered so loudly I wondered if it would break through my ribs. I let my head fall back against the seat, eyes closed, trying to let the nothingness settle around me. I could feel sweat beading along my hairline, and I wiped my palm across my forehead in a futile attempt to steady myself. I stared out the windshield at the empty playground, swings swaying a bit in the breeze. It looked abandoned, but it felt eerily familiar. I remembered pushing her on similar swings, her laughter rising in arcs, the world feeling safe and small at the same time. Now those memories felt like shards under my skin, tiny pieces that cut every time I tried to ignore them. My jaw ached from clenching so long, and I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to dispel the ringing in my ears. I realized I'd been avoiding the silence in my head, the questions waiting there in the dark. Who was I now? Someone broken who lashed out, or someone who finally found the courage to stop being a victim? My hands trembled as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the ring chain. It felt cold against my palm, the metal rubbing smooth from endless handling. I turned it over slowly, watching the light catch on its surface, and I wondered if it still held power over me. A whisper in my mind said, "Let it go." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I considered it. I thought about tossing it into the shadows beyond the fences, letting the darkness swallow her promise once and for all. Part of me craved that final release, but another part, this edge of steel deep in my gut, told me not yet. The ring was more than metal, it was proof. Proof that I could face her lies and still stand. Proof that I could reclaim every piece of myself she tried to steal. I took a breath and slid the chain into the cup holder, letting it coil there like a sleeping snake. Then I opened the glove compartment, pulled out my notebook, and flipped to a blank page. My fingertips hovered above the paper, and I hesitated, feeling like I was on the brink of something I couldn't predict. Finally, I pressed the pen to the page and wrote a single line: "I am not who she made me." The act of writing felt like striking a match in a dark room. Words poured out, raw, jagged, until my hand cramped and the ink bled through the paper. I wrote about the weight I'd carried, about the nights I felt like I might shatter under the memories. I wrote about the taste of revenge, how it burned in my throat like charcoal, and how I wasn't sure if I'd ever be free from that flame. My chest heaved with each sentence, and tears slid down my cheeks, warm and unwelcome. When I finally set the pen down, the page was covered in scrawls, confessions, doubts, little victories. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my coat and closed the notebook with a snap. My vision blurred for a moment, and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. The leather was cool, grounding me, and the silence around me felt less like emptiness and more like possibility. I reached over, picked up the ring chain, and held it between thumb and forefinger. The metal was smooth under my skin. I thought about her face when she found it at the altar, about the way shame and regret washed over her. And I realized vengeance had done its work. It had shown her the cost of her betrayal, and it had shown me my own strength. There was no triumphant fanfare, no sense of closure. Just a quiet understanding that I could survive this, and that I could choose what came next. I tucked the ring back into my pocket. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, headlights carving a path through the dark. With every mile, the weight in my pocket felt less like a burden and more like a reminder of how far I'd come. And as the city lights gave way to open road, I realized I was driving towards something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I rolled down the window to let the wind slap my face, like it was forcing me awake. My heart still felt like a storm trapped in my ribs, each breath rattling against my sternum. I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the road ahead, gray bars of dawn bleeding through the trees. The city was still asleep, but I felt more awake than I'd ever been. There was no turning back now. I thought about tossing the ring into the river, letting it vanish under the surface. But my fingers drifted to my pocket, and I realized I couldn't. That ring was both anchor and weapon, a reminder of what I lost and what I'd done to get here. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling the hazardous mixture of regret and triumph colliding like crashing waves. I remembered her eyes when she found that ring at the chapel, wide, flooded with shock, guilt pooling like a storm cloud. Guilt, yeah, sometimes I wonder if she even understood how deep it cut, how each beat of her heart must have echoed with the cost she'd paid. My jaw clenched at the memory, and I felt a shiver run through me. It was like tasting ice on my tongue, cold but vivid. I knew she'd never feel safe again, not with her own reflection. The shrill beep of my phone yanked me from my thoughts. A message from an unknown number flickered on screen: Lot 7. South Side. You know why? My breath hitched. Lot 7, that was where we'd parked after our first date, laughing as the brake lights splashed red against the asphalt. My chest tightened like someone yanked a cord beneath my skin. Part of me wanted to smash the phone, but curiosity twisted my gut into a knot. I parked in the lot, signs of early morning dew dotting the cars like tiny tears. My footsteps clicked across the pavement. The place felt deserted, echoing with memories I thought I'd buried. I spotted him standing by the chain-link fence, head bowed. My heart skittered, and I felt my knees go weak. He looked up when I approached, eyes shadowed with fatigue and something else, fear, maybe? He didn't speak. His lips trembled, like he'd gone dry. I clenched my hands at my sides, nails biting into my palms. I remembered touching his wrist at the pier, seeing the way his skin lost color. That moment was like a spark to dry tinder. I'd lit the fire, but I hadn't finished it. He took a step back, and I saw it then, a note pinned to his coat lapel. I peeled it free, reading the words scrawled in spidery script: "Tell her you're sorry." My pulse hammered through my ears, mixing with the ragged inhale of the wind. He looked up again, searching for my face, maybe hoping for mercy. I could see guilt etched in the lines of his forehead, see his shoulders slump as if carrying her weight. Part of me felt pity so sharp it cut, like tasting acid on an open wound. Another part surged with cold delight. Revenge was a drug, and right then I needed another hit. My breath snagged in my throat, and I swallowed hard. "You know what to say," I whispered, voice rough and low. My jaw ached with the effort of holding back everything else I wanted to say. His lips quivered as he opened his mouth, and I felt a twist of expectation. I'm sorry," he finally stammered, words tumbling out like stones down a hill. The silence that followed was thick, as if the world held its breath. His apology sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. I felt something twist inside, anger flared like a live wire. But then I felt another shift, a twinge of sorrow for both of us. He'd been her accomplice, but he was also a pawn in her deception. I nodded once, stiffly. "That's a start," I said, voice low, like I was tasting the words. I turned away, feeling the crease of dawn brush my back. My hands loosened into fists, then relaxed, and I realized I was crying, silent tears streaking down my cheeks, warm and unwanted. I walked back to my car, boots crunching on gravel. The sky blushed pink, and I felt something new wake in my chest, a fragile thread of something I couldn't name. Hope? Redemption? I wasn't sure. But as the lot receded behind me, I knew this chapter wasn't over. Not for her, not for me, and not for him. I slid into the driver's seat, wiped my face on my sleeve, and drove off, leaving the parking lot and its ghosts behind, but carrying their echoes forward. I woke to an empty apartment, the kind of silence that feels like someone pulled the air out of the room. My chest tightened, each breath dredging up the memory of her laugh echoing off these walls. I pressed my palm against my sternum, tasting the lingering sting of betrayal as if it were salt on an open wound. The ring chain lay on the nightstand, a cold weight mocking the warmth I'd once believed in. I stared at it, jaw clenched so tight I could almost taste metal, and I wondered if I'd ever feel my heart beat steady again. I moved through the rooms on autopilot, each step echoing in hollow chambers where our future used to live. I shivered, though the morning light filtering through the curtains promised warmth. I threw a jacket on, one I'd never imagined wearing without her beside me, and ran my fingers over the chain in my pocket. My hands shook, prickled with the same tension I felt when I first discovered her secret. It was that same coil of dread and determination that kept me tethered to this path. Outside, the air was crisp, and I felt it fill my lungs like unforgiving clarity. I headed to the florist she'd chosen for our wedding, heart pounding at every crosswalk. The shop was bright, bursting with blooms I'd once picked out for centerpieces. I paused at the door, breathing in the scent of lilies and hope, a twisted reminder of everything she'd stolen. I pushed inside, nodding at the florist who offered a polite smile. Nothing about this moment felt polite. I asked for a single calla lily, its white petals pristine. My fingers grazed its stem, and I imagined how that purity would shatter when she saw me. I carried the flower to her favorite coffee spot, a tiny patisserie with rose-patterned wallpaper and the scent of fresh pastries. She'd loved their croissants, saying nothing tasted better on our first morning as fiancés. I ordered 2 coffees but only took one. The barista gave me a curious look as I tucked the flower into my coat pocket. I sat by the window, tracing the condensation on my cup, waiting. My heart thrummed like a trapped bird, claws scraping against my ribs in panic and anticipation. When she arrived, her face lit up for a brief second, like she recognized something familiar, then crumpled when she saw me. I held the coffee out and she glanced at the cup, confusion flickering across her features. I offered the flower, its petals trembling in my hand. She reached for it, fingertips brushing mine, and I felt a spark of everything I'd lost. Her mouth opened, words stuck in her throat. Her eyes glistened, regret, fear, something shattered. My throat went dry. I tilted my head, forcing my voice steady. "I thought you might like this." She sniffed, bringing the bloom to her face, then pressed it to her chest as if it belonged there. Her eyes fell to the ring chain around my neck. She froze. I wrapped my fingers around the chain brushing against my skin like a pulse of memory. "This was ours," I said, voice barely above a whisper. I thought you should have something real. Her lips trembled, and I saw tears gather. The hush between us felt vast, like the distance she'd put between us the moment she betrayed me. She swallowed, running a hand through her hair, breath trembling. I stared at her, feeling the ache of every promise we'd made. Then I stood, pocketed the flower stem, and let the chain slip back beneath my shirt. My steps took me away before she could speak, leaving her at the table with a coffee cooling like forgiveness I couldn't give. Outside, the sky had turned gold, and I realized the morning held something I hadn't expected: release. As I walked away, I felt the knot in my chest loosen, replaced by something quiet and aching, the first hint of letting go. I woke to the scent of rain drifting through an open window, the soft patter against the sill like distant tears. My head throbbed with the memory of the morning's encounter, her face crumpled over a coffee, me walking away. My chest felt hollow and too loud at once, like an echo chamber where every heartbeat knocked against empty walls. I lay there, fingers curling around the edge of the mattress, pulse rasping beneath my skin. I rolled out of bed and stood, legs wobbly as if I'd just climbed a mountain in my sleep. My hands trembled when I reached for the chain under my shirt, the ring tapping against my ribs with each breath. I pressed a palm to my sternum, tasting salt, and swallowed hard. The room was dim, only the gray light of dawn slicing through Venetian blinds. I wondered if I could ever feel steady again, or if this tremor would stay in my bones forever. I dressed slowly, jeans and a hoodie she once said made me look approachable, and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were rimmed red, skin sallow. I raised a hand, fingertips brushing the hollow beneath my collarbone where the chain lay. My reflection felt fractured, like two people sharing one face. A part of me wanted to rip it off and start fresh, another part clung to the scars as proof of whatever I'd become. I left the apartment without locking the door, letting it swing shut behind me on its own. Outside, the world felt too alive, every leaf glistened with water, every car passing sprayed my ankles. I walked without direction, boots squelching on wet pavement. The knot in my gut twisted tight as I navigated streets that once held happy memories: our favorite park bench, the corner bookstore where we'd browse tide pools of poetry. Now each spot felt poisoned, like I was stumbling through a gallery of pain. My phone buzzed. Her name. I ignored it. The silence screamed louder than any apology she could offer. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and focused on the rhythm of my steps: heel, toe, pause, like a mantra to stop my thoughts racing. But they roared anyway, waves crashing against the rocky shore of my mind. I felt both stained by her betrayal and sharper than I'd ever been, like a blade honed on grief. I turned down an alley and found an abandoned mural painted years ago, vivid clouds parting over a stormy sea. Something about it drew me forward. I stood before it, rain dripping from my coat, and traced a finger through the chipped paint. My breath hitched when the color smudged, as though the storm had seeped into me. In that moment, I realized I was no longer chasing revenge. I was chasing clarity, some way to understand how a love so fierce could become so cruel. My chest tightened, and I sank onto a nearby crate. I pressed my forehead to my knees, arms wrapped around my shins. I felt tears, hot and heavy, pressing at my lids. I wanted to scream until my lungs collapsed, but the rain muffled everything. Instead, I let the tears fall, mixing with the water on my cheeks until I couldn't tell which was which. My jaw unlocked in a silent sob, shoulders shaking like a leaf in a gale. And then I sat, trembling, listening to the city breathe around me. The rain slowed to droplets, and I felt a curious shift inside. No grand epiphany, just a subtle loosening of something taut. In that quiet, I understood that revenge had been my refuge, something to hold onto when betrayal shattered every promise. But I'd been so focused on making her feel pain that I'd forgotten I needed to feel something real myself. I uncapped my pen and pulled a scrap of paper from my pocket. My hand wrote, "I deserve to heal." The letters were shaky, uneven, but they felt like stepping stones. I realized I could choose to carry the ring as a reminder of my survival, not just as a weapon against her. My heart still throbbed, but the ache had a softer edge now, like the first bruise that will scar over. I folded the paper and tucked it beside the chain in my pocket. My legs gave way, and I leaned back against the wall, watching the mural's storm fade in the distance. The rain stopped entirely, leaving the alley slick and silent. My breathing slowed, each inhale a little less jagged. I stared up at the sky, pink light breaking through the clouds, and felt, for the first time, a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks: forgiveness. I stood, coat dripping, paper and chain heavy in my pocket. I knew I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was steering toward a path that wasn't just about payback. As I stepped back into the street, the wet pavement reflected the dawn's promise. And I realized that this was how I'd reclaim my story, not by making her suffer, but by finally letting myself live. I woke to the distant rumble of traffic, the city stirring before me. My chest felt quiet for the first time in days, a soft, almost alien calm resting behind my ribs. I pressed a hand to my sternum, fingertips brushing the chain tucked beneath my shirt. The ring lay flat against my skin, a weight both familiar and strange. I closed my eyes, tasting the morning air, and felt the subtle tremor of something new, possibility. I dressed without thought, pulling on a worn jacket and jeans that had seen better days. My hands moved with ease, no longer shaking with purpose or poison. Outside, the street was bathed in pale gold light, dew glinting on parked cars like tiny promises. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, watching the tension fall away, drop by drop, until my shoulders felt looser, unburdened. I decided to drive to the old pier, where everything had begun and where I'd first tasted the bitter tang of betrayal. The road curved beneath my wheels and I felt an odd eagerness, like I was returning to a place I'd outgrown. The air smelled of salt and pine, a strange comfort. I parked at the end of the wooden planks and stepped onto the pier, boots creaking underfoot. The ocean stretched out, glassy and infinite, reflecting the clear sky above. I leaned on the railing, eyes following the dance of sunlight on the waves. My jaw unclenched, and I felt tears threaten, not sharp with anger but warm with something like awe. My hands curled around the ring's chain and I let the pendant swing, back and forth, a pendulum marking time that now felt steady. I thought about her, about the girl who once stood beside me under string lights, brimful of dreams. I felt a soft ache, not the searing pain of betrayal, but a gentler sorrow for what had been lost. My voice came out in a whisper. I hope you find peace. The words were for me as much as for her, salve for my own wounds. I exhaled, and the sound scattered over the water. I unhooked the chain from beneath my shirt and held it between thumb and forefinger. The metal felt heavy, a reminder of every secret and every lie. But I no longer saw it as a weapon. I saw it as a keepsake of my own endurance. My pulse settled into a steady rhythm as I looped the chain around a wooden post, knotting it with deliberate calm. The ring caught a ray of sunlight and glowed softly, like a beacon for a direction yet unknown. My hands were steady as I released the chain, watching the pendant rest against the weathered wood. A breeze picked up, tugging at my hair and carrying my exhale out over the sea. I felt a strange liberation, as though I'd shed a second skin. My chest felt open, and I welcomed the emptiness it left behind, not a void but a space ready to be filled. I turned and walked to the pier's edge, toes nearly at the precipice where wood met water. I imagined tossing the ring into the depths, and for a moment I hesitated, thumb brushing the cool surface of the wood. Then I shook my head and stepped back. Letting go didn't have to be destruction. Sometimes it meant leaving the past where it could no longer wound me. I stepped off the pier and onto the gravel path, boots crunching with purpose. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating every detail: moss on stones, gulls wheeling above, the distant hum of life stirring in the town. I felt connected to it all, a single strand woven into something vast. My pulse felt like a quiet drumbeat, guiding me forward. Before I reached my car, I paused and reached into my pocket for the folded note I'd written in the alley. I opened it, reading, "I deserve to heal." I folded it gently and tucked it back in, alongside the memory of everything that had brought me here. I realized healing didn't mean forgetting, it meant carrying the lessons with compassion instead of rage. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The hum felt like a lullaby guiding me onward. As I pulled away, the pier and the ring faded in my rearview mirror, small and still. I exhaled, this time feeling free air fill my lungs. The road ahead wound into the horizon, uncharted and inviting. And I knew, for the first time, I was ready to live beyond her betrayal, ready to find out who I would become next. That evening, I drove toward the coast, headlights slicing through fog that clung like regret. The ring I'd left behind at the pier felt lighter now, a memory tethered to a weathered post. My chest felt calm, steady thumps echoing in my ears as if marking a fresh beginning. I kept the folded note in my pocket, its edges soft and worn from my touch. When I reached a turnout overlooking the water, I stopped the car. The horizon was a blur of charcoal and slate, and I leaned against the hood, arms crossed over my ribcage. A breeze stirred my hair and carried the distant gull calls, each cry a reminder that life moved on beyond my pain. I closed my eyes and let the salt air fill my lungs, feeling tension melt from my shoulders. My hands slid into the coat pockets and wrapped around the note, fingers brushing the words I'd written, words that had once trembled on the page, but now felt etched in purpose. I unfolded it, reading silently, "I deserve to heal." My voice would have cracked if I'd spoken aloud. Tiny tears welled, and I blinked them back, taste of freedom and sorrow mingling on my tongue. Below me, waves lapped at the rocky shore, patient and relentless. I watched the water surge, remembered how I'd once imagined tears dissolving my grief in torrents like this. But healing, I realized, was neither flood nor drought. It was the slow erosion of sharp edges until even pain became part of the landscape. My hips shifted, and I felt the solid weight of both ring and note in my pocket, as if they anchored me to what I'd become. I slid from the hood and paced to the guardrail, fingertips trailing along cold metal. My legs felt unsteady, but not from fear, they wobbled with readiness. I traced a finger along the guardrail's curve until I found a scratch jagged like a scar. I pressed my palm against it, drawing strength from its stubborn presence. Then I slid out my phone and snapped a photo of the coast's raw beauty. Not for proof, but as a pledge to myself, would capture moments of truth, not lies. The fog thickened, and I turned back to the car. Inside, the interior smelled of leather and memories, half-forgotten scents of our mornings together. I opened the glove compartment and found my notebook. I flipped to the last blank page and paused, taking a breath that tasted of possibility. Then I wrote, "Next chapter, mine." The words felt light, buoyant against the page. I tucked the notebook and phone into my bag, slung it across my shoulder, and closed the car door. The latch clicked shut, final and quiet. The fog pressed in, but beyond its mist, I sensed the path ahead, unmarked but mine to claim. My boots crunched on gravel as I walked toward the cliff's edge, each step a reaffirmation that I could face the world unafraid. I paused where dry grass met sheer drop, heart humming with quiet urgency. The vast expanse of water spread before me like a promise I'd nearly forgotten. I lifted my face to the wind, eyes open to the damp, infinite sky. I whispered into the air, not for her, not for him, but for myself, I am free. The words dissolved into fog, but I felt them resonate deep in my bones. I turned and began the walk back to the car. My shoulders were lighter, and the ring's absence felt right. The note in my pocket pulsed softly, a quiet victory. And as I retraced my steps along the coast road, the sun broke through the clouds in a thin streak of gold. I smiled, not because everything was healed, but because I'd survived. And that survival would carry me forward, far beyond revenge, toward a life I was finally ready to claim.